Super glad to be part of X Day again. I had been contemplating, the days of the year that I enjoy the most, and I will say X Day is one of the events that I really do enjoy. It's I think my second one, and the very fact that Question Pro does an entire day around experience is to me really very interesting. I'm really therefore humbled and honored to as the CMO of HouseAmp, to be able to speak today about AI, people, emotions, data, and what I call contextual business. Now, I apologize that this is a recording. These are the things that happen with scheduling at times, but I'm very passionate about this area, and I want to send felicitations to Crystal and Vivek for inviting me to speak yet again. Let's hope that the fact that there's a recording this time doesn't mean that I won't be invited back. Now, I know from working with Question Pro and from knowing their business that there's a very vast audience at this day, right? People who are customers of Question Pro, market researchers, marketers, product development people, people from the largest and loftiest of enterprises to the smallest of startups. And so I tried to keep my comments today fairly generic, but I look forward to feedback that you can send through to Crystal or any of the Question Pro team back to me. So let me just get going. If you listened today only to marketing people and media, you think a few different things. One is you think that every single person on the planet is using and benefiting from AI. You think that AI is this is revolutionary, that it means something far beyond any other concept that you've ever dealt with in business. You'd also believe that literally anyone who uses data for anything is an AI company, because everybody's making claims around being an AI company, a machine learning company, whether these claims are fatuous or real. You'd also believe that automation is everything, that it's the most important thing in business. And you'd believe that efficiency is by definition a good thing. But here's a weird thing. You'd hear all about AI, machine learning, automation, digital transformation, but then you'd hear people are your greatest asset. You'd hear that empathy is important. You'd hear that all organizations are people-centric. So what's really going on here? Is it the machine? Is it people? What's going on here? The fact is that there are massive contradictions everywhere. Is it machines first or people first in the new world of business? Is automation important or is human ingenuity important? Is innovation important or is efficiency important? Do we work with data or emotion? Do we lead with empathy or just go business and profit as usual? Sometimes the business world speaks out of both sides of its mouth, and often with a forked tongue, if you ask me. But there are more dichotomies that we have to deal with as marketers, market researchers, product development people, salespeople, etc. There's the traditional versus digital divide, and that creates all kinds of civil war. There's the marketing mix, which says that you need to spread your marketing bets over a bunch of different types of channel. And then you take that against targeting, which says, no, you don't spread your marketing. You target very clearly through some sort of means. We have the data-driven versus emotion-driven problem. Do we look at data as a cold analytical concept, or do we understand that humans, with all of their emotions and vagaries, are behind business decisions? And then we have one that's super relevant to this. Do we emphasize customer service and experience or cost? They often come at loggerheads. They're often at loggerheads, right? They're in contradiction. So how do we reconcile all of these different disparate threads and create a new paradigm? Well, one thing is for sure. You cannot really build a new paradigm by relying on old methodologies or for worshiping old business gods. We need to therefore shed all of the universalisms in business. We have to assume that what we consider normative, what we consider obvious, what we consider axiomatic, may or may not be the case. For instance, we all think that maximizing profit is our God-given right. We all think that great customer service is incredible. We all think that team cohesion is super important. Well, maybe not. Maybe, but maybe not. And no, I'm not kidding. I'm serious. That's why I'm saying that we need to enter a new phase of business called contextual business. Think about that for a moment. Contextual business. Business and success depend largely on the context in which they're placed. And we'll cover that a little bit more in just a moment. There are what I call 3 Ds of contextual business. One is dunno, I don't know. 2 is depends. And 3 is different. Don't know, depends, different. These are the 3 Ds of contextual business. And I would argue that instead of always having the answers, instead of harking back to universalisms, and instead of putting businesses all in one box, we realize that in contextual business, everything's up in the air. And all of the home truths, all of the things we see on LinkedIn and bandied about as philosophy may or may not apply, right? Contextual business is based on a chemical mix between data and emotions, data and human subjectivity, and on the other hand, on the chemical mix between machines and artificial intelligence on the one hand, and people on the other. We'll find that quite often these things, instead of working in pure unison, are working against each other, or that neither one of them, while necessary, is sufficient to be able to build a great company or a great organization, to serve an audience, and to be successful. If you take these dichotomies or these chemical mixes, right, we have to apply them to a particular context in order to generate contextual business. So I'm going to spend the next period talking about 4 real examples of contextual business. And these are all ones that I've worked in, I have some experience in, and I've seen both the opportunities and pitfalls in. I'm going to start with house valuations, or what I call fair house pricing. I've been in the prop tech world now for about 4 years, and I've found that the most basic questions you might answer, what is my house worth? And why is it worth that? Are very, very difficult to answer. But one thing we do know, a very similar house in place X might command 5 times as much as the very similar house in place Y. Sometimes certain types of things are valued, maybe a 3-car garage is valued astronomically more than a 2-car garage. With COVID, we found that people wanted houses with private areas where they could set up an office, etc. Some places emphasize schools more than others. Some places emphasize yards over others. So it's very hard to come down to a fair way to give a fair valuation. But there's more. When you want to sell a house, there has to be a buyer. And the buyer typically is taking a mortgage. Well, when they take a mortgage, they send an appraiser to the house to make sure that the house is indeed worth what they're paying for it. Turns out that appraisers have a lot of racial bias. And so if an African-American family or a Latinx family or another family of color has artifacts over the house that indicate that they are African American, Latinx, person of color, like family pictures, etc., the appraisers, through conscious or unconscious bias, end up giving less value to the house. Well, there's an argument that, my God, if that's the case, we need to remove the human appraiser from the process and just rely on the data, right? Data can't lie. Data doesn't have racism. Data doesn't look at pictures. Well, hold on a second. What data? If you look at historical data, i.e. the historical progression of that house's value, then surely, if let's say that house is in an area that was redlined, or is an area that historically has poor investment in schools, or is near a power line or a railroad track, all of that is built into the data. So if you rely on the data without adjusting it upwards for past sins, the data has the racism and bias built into it. So there's no real answer that's easy. It's not a binary. It's not, I'll replace the appraiser and use data, or I'll only use the appraiser and no data, right? We need to find new paradigms to value homes that have historically been undervalued, especially given the disparity in home equity in different groups, and the fact that for most Americans, the equity in their home is the majority of their net worth and constitutes the only generational wealth that they'll pass from person to person. So something as simple as what's a house worth confounds us unless we look at contextual business. Look at cybersecurity, huge area. We talk about cybersecurity all the time. But you ask any cybersecurity expert, and they'll tell you one thing. It's mostly about the people. People have intentions. People make mistakes, employees, partners, etc. People can have nefarious motives. So it's really a carbon problem, not a silicon problem. It's a person problem as much as it is a tech problem. In that sense, if you attack cybersecurity purely from the perspective of a technical fix, and you don't try to inculcate a culture so that innocent mistakes don't happen, and so that these nefarious actors are weeded out, you're in deep trouble. Once again, the people equation and the tech equation have to connect in an organic fashion, in a contextual way, with regard only to cybersecurity, if we're going to have or deal with these issues that are costing businesses billions of dollars a year, both in actual money and in lost productivity. And they can really hamstring any business, especially digital businesses, right? So once again, context comes in. The more digital you are, the more likely you are to be the victim of cyber attacks. So again, contextual business at play. Take a very popular recent area, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you ask anyone nowadays, other than people who are extremely wedded to a particular ideology, they'll say DEI is a great thing. But here's the deal. Very few of them talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of morals. They talk about it as a business issue. How can you have a customer base that's diverse unless your employees are diverse? Right? That's what the argument does. But here's the problem. If you contextualize DEI as a business issue, then you can ask yourself, is it more or less important than any other business issue? If you cast it as a business issue, then you have to truly do the math. Is it really good for business? Well, for many businesses, yes. But I could argue that for many businesses, no. Let's say your business, and I'm being facetious here, but it's important. is to create a neo-Nazi newspaper, then DEI is probably not good for your business. Now, that's a ridiculously crazy example. But the point is that in the absence of understanding what is the business that we're looking at, what the context is, we can't say that any one thing is good or bad for that business. And we're falling into the trap of thinking all in one homogeneous, universal way without running into the fact that business is contextual, always. Look at digital transformation as a business imperative. Well, some pundits say every organization must undergo digital transformation. Okay. My argument is this. Look all over the developing world. There are businesses that rely on the ingenuity of a particular person and his relationships or her relationships. There are businesses that are small and weirdly unhackable because they're fully physical businesses. Let's say a small market in some place in India where they sell flour and medicines. Yes, that happens. Why should that person undergo digital transformation? What does that even mean? You know, if you have a small coffee stand where you can make, let's say, 10 great cups of coffee every 30 minutes, and that's enough to sustain you, then you don't want mobile ordering, right? Because you can't sustain it. And the relationship you built with your customer is through them standing there waiting and talking with you. There's nothing wrong with a business like that. But why should it undergo digital transformation? That's the point of contextual business. Always look at the context and shed all universalisms. This is what I call contextuality at play, or the human connection. Is it man versus humans or machines plus humans, right? Doesn't subjectivity add value? Aren't we allowed our nuances and business fetishes? And if so, maybe that stuff's not captured in AI and data. We talked about DEI just now. Of course, I'm a fan of equity, inclusion, diversity. But depending on the business, it may or may not make sense. It may or may not even be possible. What does it even mean if you're a one-person shop doing your best to scrape by $5 a day to feed your family, which is all over the world, businesses like that. Cybersecurity, we talked about it. Is it silicon or carbon, right? Is it machine and humans? Yes, of course. And digital transformation, as much as it is a technical issue, it's also a culture issue, right? It's a people issue. And it may be an issue that has no context, no relevance to your business. So it's really, really important to think about contextual business in the age of AI, right? In the age of machines, in the age of kind of data and emotion. It's important to think of contextual business. When you think about business in this manner, it liberates you from the rules. It takes you away from having to mouth all the pieties that are part of the business world. It helps you think of technology as a tool. Sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's neutral, but it's never sufficient. You need humans. It reminds us that in business, the roles of wisdom, humanity, decency, and fairness play a role. You cannot call upon a machine to be humane, decent, fair, or wise. It also forces you to cut through the hype. Most of what we read in the business press will point you towards universalisms. They'll point you towards absolutes. They'll point you towards their framing of every single business issue. In reality, the world is more complex. The world is more fine-grained. The world is more contextual, and thus we need to usher in the world of contextual business. So in closing, I'll say this. AI, machine learning, data mining, data management, data infrastructure, data visualization, data-driven, whatever, are all important pieces of the puzzle. Absolutely. Stuff that wasn't possible before is possible now. These advancements are incredible and worthy of both pride and fear. But, and I mean this, educated, empathetic, thoughtful, flexible, adaptable people who see the long view are still the most important part of any organization, process, business, or endeavor. Contextual business is the future, and humans will provide the context. I thank you all very much for listening to me. I thank the Question Pro team very, very much for inviting me, and I hope that you all have a wonderful, wonderful X day. Thank you.